All right, so let's jump into this whole cues to action thing.
Okay.
You sent over some fascinating research on how people react to health advice, especially when it comes to preventing heart disease.
Huh.
It's not as straightforward as telling someone to eat more vegetables.
Oh, not at all. There's so much psychology behind how we receive and process health information.
Right. Like in that study with the Danish men in the 1990s,
Yeah.
their reactions to the advice on preventing heart disease, it wasn't a simple one-size-fits-all situation,
Well,
was it?
you're exactly right. It wasn't.
This study mentioned 6 different reactions, didn't it? What were those again?
Yeah, so the researchers, they interviewed 21 men and found a whole range of responses.
Okay.
Some avoided the advice altogether, some felt guilty, others dismissed it entirely, and then some just continued on with their unhealthy habits.
Really? Even after getting the information?
Even after getting the information, it makes you wonder if giving advice even works.
It does. But there were a couple more positive reactions too, right?
Absolutely.
So it's not all doom and gloom.
Not at all. Some men actually used the advice to confirm that they were already on the right track with their healthy behaviors.
Well, interesting.
And even better, some were actually motivated to change.
Okay. So there's hope.
There's definitely hope.
But why such different reactions? Is it just down to individual personality?
You know, it's more nuanced than that. Think about it.
Okay.
Someone who's not even thinking about changing their diet, they're going to react to advice differently than someone who's actively trying to eat healthier.
Oh, that's true. It's like they're coming from totally different places.
Completely different headspaces.
So how do we figure out where someone is coming from, which headspace they're in?
That's where this knowledge backpack idea comes in.
A knowledge backpack.
Yeah, and this actually connects back to those different reactions we were talking about.
Okay.
It helps us understand the different types of knowledge people carry with them and how that knowledge influences their response to health advice.
Interesting. Okay. Tell me more about this knowledge backpack.
Okay, so picture an actual backpack, but this one's filled with different compartments of knowledge.
Okay, got it.
So one compartment, let's say, is for theoretical knowledge.
Theoretical knowledge.
This is the stuff we learn from scientific sources, like knowing that cholesterol is bad for you.
Right. The textbook stuff.
Exactly.
What else is in there?
Well, then there's the applied knowledge compartment.
Applied knowledge.
This is where we store information about how to actually use that theoretical knowledge. So in this case, knowing which foods are high in cholesterol.
So it's like taking the theory and putting it into practice.
Exactly. Practical application.
Makes sense. What other compartments are we working with here?
We also have a compartment for experiential knowledge.
Experiential knowledge.
This knowledge comes from our own personal experiences or the experiences of people we know, like knowing someone who had a heart attack because they smoked.
Right. Those personal stories, they can really stay with you.
They do.
I bet they have a big impact, sometimes even more than just knowing the facts.
Absolutely. And sometimes those personal stories, even if they contradict the scientific facts, they can overshadow the hard data.
Oh yeah, like when people say, well, my grandpa smoked his whole life and lived to be 100.
Exactly.
Those exceptions always seem to come up.
They do. And it makes sense. They carry a lot of weight for people.
They do. So we've got theoretical, applied, and experiential knowledge. Anything else in this knowledge backpack?
And one more compartment. We have intuitive knowledge.
Intuitive knowledge.
This is all about gut feelings and instincts about what's healthy. Less about facts and more about a deep-seated sense of what feels right or wrong.
It's like having a feeling about certain foods being unhealthy, even if you can't quite explain why.
Precisely. It's fascinating how much influence these gut feelings have on our choices.
This backpack analogy is really helpful. It explains why just giving people information isn't always enough to change their behavior.
Yeah.
There's this whole filter of personal experience and beliefs that they run that information through.
Exactly. And that's where cues to action come into play. It's about figuring out how to present information in a way that resonates with all those different compartments of knowledge.
I see.
And ultimately motivates people to actually make positive changes.
I'm starting to see how this all fits together. It's not just about what we say, but how we say it and who we're saying it to.
You've got it.
And there's so much more to learn about how those cues to action actually work.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you mentioned, that research about how we frame behavioral recommendations.
Right.
That can really impact how effective they are.
It can.
So what kind of research are we talking about here? What's this framing all about?
Well, researchers have found that concrete behavioral recommendations are way more effective than abstract ones.
Can you give me an example?
Sure.
What's the difference between concrete and abstract in this context?
So let's say you're trying to encourage people to eat more anthocyanins.
Anthocyanin.
Those beneficial plant compounds you find in colorful fruits and veggies.
Oh, right. The things that make blueberries blue.
Exactly. They're found in lots of fruits and veggies, especially those with blue, purple, or red hues.
Okay.
An abstract recommendation would be to tell someone to consume 180, 215 milligrams of anthocyanins daily.
Wow. That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
I can see why that wouldn't be very motivating. It sounds very technical.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
A concrete recommendation would be something like, eat 3 bowls of purple fruits and veggies a week.
Okay. That's much easier to understand, and it actually sounds appealing.
It does, right?
Like, I actually picture myself doing that. Why are the concrete recommendations so much better?
It comes down to self-relevancy and self-efficacy.
Self-relevancy and self-efficacy.
So concrete recommendations help people feel like they understand what they need to do, and more importantly, that they can actually do it.
I see. So it's like giving them a clear path to follow instead of just saying, go explore the wilderness.
Exactly. And when people feel confident in their ability to take action, they're much more likely to actually follow through.
That makes sense. It feels like those concrete recommendations are appealing to both our heads and our hearts.
You got it. They make the information relevant to our lives, and they empower us to make positive changes.
This is so insightful. I feel like I'm looking at health advice in a whole new way.
Me too.
And we've only just scratched the surface here.
Yeah.
There's still so much more to explore about cues to action
There is.
and how they can help us live healthier lives.
Absolutely.
I'm excited to dig deeper. But for now, let's take a break and come back with more insights in part 2.
Sounds good. So we're back and still exploring this fascinating world of cues to action.
Yeah, and how they can influence our health choices.
Right, we're kind of cracking the code of how to make those healthy changes stick.
Exactly.
Like figuring out the psychology behind our choices and using that knowledge to really promote real lasting change.
And we were just talking about how powerful those concrete behavioral recommendations can be.
Yeah.
Those clear, actionable cues that can make a big difference.
Right, those specific suggestions that just take the guesswork out and make those healthy choices actually feel achievable.
Yeah, it's like giving someone the tools and the confidence to build a healthier lifestyle for themselves.
It is.
It reminds me of that saying, give a man a fish
Yeah.
and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime.
Oh, I like that.
Except here, we're teaching people how to fish for health.
That's a great analogy. It really captures the idea that concrete recommendations empower people to make those healthy choices, not just in that moment, but for the long haul.
Right, so instead of just saying, eat healthier,
Right.
we give them specific actionable tips like swap white bread for whole grain or add an extra serving of veggies to your dinner. Snack on a handful of nuts instead of chips.
Exactly. Those concrete recommendations, they give people a clear path to follow.
Yeah, it's not this vague, overwhelming idea of eating healthier anymore.
Right.
It's about taking those simple, specific steps.
Yeah.
You know, it makes me think about all the times I felt paralyzed by that generic health advice.
Uh-huh.
It's like, okay, eat healthier, got it. But how?
Right.
Like, I know I should, but I need more specifics.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's like handing someone a blank canvas and saying, paint a masterpiece.
Yeah.
They might have all the desire in the world, but without specific instructions, it's hard to know where to even begin.
Right. It's overwhelming.
It is.
So concrete recommendations, they're like providing the paintbrushes and the colors.
Yes.
And even some tips on technique.
Exactly.
They make the task much less daunting and much more manageable.
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it.
It's moving from that fuzzy concept to a clear set of instructions.
And that can make all the difference in whether someone feels inspired to actually take action or not.
It can. So helpful. I'm definitely going to be more mindful about using those concrete recommendations,
Good.
both for myself and when I'm talking to others about health.
Yeah. It's such a powerful tool.
It is.
And it really highlights how important it is to understand how people learn and how we can tailor our communication to be more effective.
Speaking of tailoring communication, one thing that's been on my mind is how we navigate that sometimes tricky relationship between scientific knowledge and personal experience.
Oh, yeah. That age-old battle between the head and the heart.
Exactly. Because we talked about how influential those personal stories and experiences can be,
They are.
even when they contradict the science.
Right.
So how do we reconcile those two things?
It's a challenge.
It is. It feels like a delicate balancing act.
It is. And it takes a nuanced approach. I think one important element is to acknowledge and validate those personal experiences,
Okay.
even if they don't perfectly align with the scientific consensus.
So instead of immediately dismissing someone's anecdote about their aunt who ate bacon every day and lived to be 90,
Right.
we try to understand why that story is so meaningful to them.
Exactly. It's about empathy and respect. Because often those stories represent deep-seated beliefs, and trying to argue someone out of those beliefs is likely to backfire.
It's like trying to convert someone to a different religion.
Yeah,
Rarely works through confrontation.
it really doesn't. A gentler, more compassionate approach is usually much more effective.
Right.
You could say something like, I understand that your aunt's experience is very meaningful to you, and it's wonderful that she lived such a long life.
Okay.
At the same time, research shows that a diet high in saturated fat, like bacon, can increase the risk of heart disease.
So we're presenting the scientific evidence without dismissing their personal beliefs.
Exactly.
It's like we're honoring both sides of the story.
Right. It's about holding both perspectives with respect and understanding.
I like that.
We're not trying to convince anyone that their experiences are invalid. We're simply offering some additional information to consider.
It feels more like a dialogue than a debate.
It does.
And that seems much more productive.
Absolutely. It's in that space of respectful dialogue where we acknowledge both the head and the heart that real change is possible.
This is so illuminating. I'm really starting to get a grasp on the complexities of these cues to action and how they intersect with human psychology.
Yeah. It's a fascinating field.
It is. It reminds us that health communication is about so much more than just delivering facts.
It is.
It's about understanding people,
Right.
connecting with them on a personal level, and really empowering them to make those healthy choices for themselves.
Absolutely. And those healthy choices don't always have to be massive overhauls.
Right.
Sometimes it's about those small, concrete steps that add up over time.
It's about progress, not perfection.
I love that. It feels hopeful and empowering.
It does.
And it brings us back to the core of this whole discussion. Cues to action are about giving people the tools and support they need
Yeah.
to create lasting positive change in their lives.
And those tools and that support can come in many forms. From those concrete recommendations we've been talking about to having those empathetic conversations that really bridge the gap between science and personal experience.
You got it. It's about meeting people where they are and guiding them step by step towards a healthier, happier life.
This has been such an incredible deep dive. We've covered so much ground already.
We have.
I'm sure there's still even more to explore, though.
Always is. But for now, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned and come back with some final thoughts in part 3.
All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into cues to action.
It's been pretty fascinating, hasn't it?
It has. Exploring how we can actually use psychology and good communication to nudge ourselves and others towards healthier choices.
Right, and we've covered a lot of ground.
We have, from those different types of knowledge we carry around, like in those metaphorical backpacks, to the impact of using concrete behavioral recommendations.
Yeah, and that importance of empathy and respect when we're navigating those kind of tricky waters between scientific evidence and personal experience.
It's not about just dismissing someone's personal story. It's about figuring out how those stories can work with the facts.
Exactly. It's like creating a space where both sides can be heard and contribute to better decisions.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the key takeaways you hope listeners will remember?
Well, I think the biggest one is that just giving people information isn't always enough to get them to change their behavior.
Yeah.
It's about understanding their knowledge backpack, meeting them where they are in their readiness to change, and then providing those clear, actionable cues they can actually use.
Like telling someone to eat 3 bowls of purple fruits and veggies a week instead of consume 180, 215 milligrams of anthocyanins daily.
Exactly. Make those healthy choices feel doable and maybe even a little bit delicious.
Definitely. And it's about remembering that we all have those different types of knowledge that influence our worldview, especially when it comes to our health.
Right. And sometimes those types of knowledge might clash.
Yeah.
Someone's personal experience might contradict what science tells us, and that can create tension.
So how do we deal with that tension? What advice would you give to our listeners who might be facing that in their own lives?
I think the most important thing is to approach those conversations with a lot of empathy and respect.
Okay.
Try to really understand why that personal experience carries so much weight for them.
Because those stories, they're often more than just anecdotes.
Yeah.
They're these deep-seated beliefs that really shape someone's entire view of the world.
You're exactly right. Trying to argue someone out of a deeply held belief usually doesn't work. It usually makes things worse.
Right.
Instead, try to find common ground, acknowledge their story, validate their feelings, and then you can gently introduce the scientific evidence.
So it's not about choosing sides.
No.
It's about bringing those different perspectives together.
Exactly. And it's in that space of integration where we honor both the head and the heart that real lasting change can occur.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive.
I think so too.
I feel like I've got this whole new set of tools for understanding and actually using cues to action.
And like with any set of tools, the key is using them wisely and with compassion.
Well said.
Yeah.
And like always, we like to leave our listeners with a final thought to ponder.
If personal experience can be so powerful even when it clashes with science, how can we use those stories to help people make healthier choices?
Such a good question. It seems like there's so much potential in the power of storytelling.
I think so. And it's definitely something we can all reflect on as we navigate this world of health information.
Definitely. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure.
We hope you've enjoyed it and discovered something new.
Remember, the path to a healthier life, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
Take it one step, one concrete recommendation, one empathetic conversation at a time.
Great advice. Until next time, keep diving deep.